I've had my pilot's license for 18 years. I've had my own airplane for the last 9 of those years. And in this video, I'm gonna break it down for you step by step how you can make that happen. So from a high level, there's 3 main steps. There's the ground school, the ground training, the flight training, and then your final check ride. So let's start by diving into the ground school. And ground school really just means all of the required book knowledge that you have to learn. A lot of this stuff is going to be net new information, like you've probably never studied weather theory before, or airspace, or regulations, or theories of lift and all that stuff. So all of it is new. It can be really intimidating, but try not to get overwhelmed. The main challenge in this is not the quality of the information, but it's the quantity. Like no one topic is all that hard to comprehend. Some stuff's harder than others. Most of it's pretty understandable. It's really just the volume that gets people. And I've got a tip for you in a minute that's going to make the volume a lot easier, but the main ways that you can learn all of the ground schools, you can either do it in person or online. In person, you can either meet one-on-one with an instructor and they will teach everything to you. If you're gonna go in person, the more common way to do it in person is either do like an intensive 3-day ground school at a flight school, or maybe like 1 night a week for 8 weeks or something like that, where you're gonna kind of just try to binge it if you can. The other way to do it is online, and this is probably becoming the most popular way now, just because it's the easiest and most accessible. But there's lots of different online ground school providers. Usually it's gonna be a ton of videos to watch, some quizzes, some tests, an online video course basically. But either way, you're gonna go through this process, and what you're looking for at the end of it is you're looking to get a logbook endorsement. So what the heck is a logbook? This is a logbook. You can do it digitally. Some people track it digitally. I like the old school written method, but this is literally a book where you are gonna log every single one of your flights that you ever take. Where you started, where you ended up, how many landings you had, total flight time, your instructor will sign it, et cetera, et cetera. But in the very back of this logbook, there's a whole section for endorsements. I'll show you a picture on the screen here. And this endorsement for your written exam is basically going to say that you have studied the relevant topics and you are prepared for your written exam. If you do your training in person, your instructor will literally sign your logbook. If you do it online and you take a number of their practice tests and stuff, they can actually issue you this endorsement digitally. They just send you a certificate, and that's what you can take to the exam center to tell them that you are ready and endorsed to take the test. But remember that I said the biggest challenge here is just the volume of content. And so my biggest piece of advice here is twofold. One is you need to take notes, which might sound obvious, but I promise you're not going to feel like you have to take notes. Because if you're in person, your CFI is like, your instructor is telling you stuff, you're like, okay, I got it, that makes sense. But the next time you're gonna forget. Or if you're watching videos, you're gonna be like, oh, that makes sense, let's go to the next video. And then when it comes time to like review all this stuff, you're not gonna go back and watch dozens and dozens and dozens of videos. You really need your own notes. But the most important thing is the second point here, is if you can really try to write your notes as questions. And this does something really powerful. It basically unlocks active recall. So instead of just passively reviewing your notes and you're like just trying to just binge it and like, force it into your brain, cram it into your brain, it instead forces active recall because you have to read it as a question and just attempt to pull something out of your brain, see if it's correct, polish it up, and then push it back in. And like the data suggests that active recall is way better. And so that is a really helpful way to commit all of this stuff to memory. Now, once you actually get to the written test, this is gonna be at a specific testing facility. A lot of times flight schools are an authorized testing facility, but if not, once you get there, your instructor will help you find a place to take the test. But it's like proctored. There's someone making sure like you're not gonna cheat and everything, not that you would, but like it's like an intense testing environment. It's on a computer, it's 60 questions, you have 2 hours to do it. There's no perk for finishing early, like use the 2 hours, double check your answers. You are gonna get like a separate booklet that can have like a bunch of different exhibits or maps or different things in it that it might reference, like, hey, go look at this table and whatever. So there's like some physical stuff that you're using, but ultimately it's on a computer. 70% is your passing grade. But here's the thing that like nobody told me when I took my test when I was 15 years old, is that anything you miss on your written test, they have to then ask you about on your check ride. And I'll explain the check ride later, but it's your final like in-person exam. And so yeah, you have to pass the written exam, but it behooves you to get as like high of a score as you can. So I really would suggest not taking the test until you're getting like high 90s on your practice tests. There's tons of places online that offer free practice tests. You can take as many as you want. Your goal shouldn't be passing. Your goal should be to get 100. Now in 2024, there were about 46,000 pilots that took the written private pilot test. and it had an average pass rate of about 92%, pretty good, and an average score of about 83%. So chances are really, really good that you're going to pass. Now, you can take your written test really at any point in your training. A lot of people, like if this is your written and this is your flight, a lot of people will end up overlapping them to some degree. If you wanted to do all of your ground school first and knock out your written and then do your flight, you totally can. The only thing you need to keep in mind is that your written is only good for 24 months before it expires, so to speak. So you want to take that within basically 2 years of taking your final check ride, but that's a lot of time. And so usually what happens is it overlaps a little bit. And in the FAA, their suggestion on this, and it's just a suggestion, is to wait to take your written exam until you've reached the point of your solo cross-country flight. And I'll explain that in a few minutes, kind of where that is in your training. But at that point, like you're navigating, you're flying by yourself, like you have enough real world experience to attach the book concepts and the book knowledge to, and you're probably likely to score higher on your exam as a result, but you can really do it at any point. You just have to have your written exam done before you actually take your final check ride. Real quick, I want to let you know about a new free resource that I just launched. It's basically a huge PDF of all of my takeaways. Like I said, I've been licensed for 18 years. I've owned an airplane for 9 years. I've learned a lot of stuff. Some things through doing things correctly, some things through just mistakes I've made. And so I put together kind of a narrative of all the different things I've experienced. But the most important thing is it's really skimmable. So it'll have a little story of what happened to me and then the takeaways. So if you want, you can just scroll through and just see all the things I've learned in 18 years really quickly. It's totally free. You can get a copy over at airplaneacademy.com/takeaways, or the link is also down in the description. All right, so next up is your flight training. So first you'll need to find a flight school, and this is a spectrum. Like on one end of the spectrum, it's just an instructor with a plane that'll teach you. On the other end of the spectrum, it's like a full-blown flight school with potentially dozens of airplanes and dozens of instructors, like the full thing. But in general, there are two different types of flight schools you need to know about. There's Part 61 and there's Part 141. So what the heck is that? Well, what is a part? Well, these parts are just subcomponents of Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR. Title 14 governs aeronautics and space within the US, and there are a ton of subparts within that basically just provide all of the rules and regulations for aviation in the United States. And so within that, there are a ton of different parts. And so Part 61, for example, talks about the requirements for getting your pilot's license. Part 141, on the other hand, governs flight schools and their curriculum and their requirements. So an instructor could teach you under the rules of Part 61 to say, here are the things you need to do to become qualified to become a pilot. On the other hand, you could go to a Part 141 school and they have developed a syllabus and curriculum and have certain like passing standards and things to basically earn this 141 certification. That the net effect of that is that the amount of flight hours, like the minimum you need, is actually lowered for Part 141 schools because they have that structure and that approved curriculum and demonstrated outcomes and things like that. And so that's one of the early things you'll have to decide in a flight school is, do I want to go Part 61 or do I want to go Part 141? In general, 141 is going to be just so much more structured. Like, they have the syllabus and like there's no mystery of like you're doing this lesson, then this lesson, then this lesson, and then there's a stage check and it's like very formal and you kind of go through that process. 61 on the other hand is a lot more flexible. There's not that published curriculum. Like the CFI is going to kind of know what they're doing, obviously, but it's going to be a lot more flexible in that way. So you got to decide which environment you like more. And if you'd like more information comparing the two, there's a whole article about it over on airplaneacademy.com. I will link it down in the description if you'd like to learn more. But either way you go in flight training, you're just trying to accomplish two things. One, you're trying to get to the minimum amount of hours, which for Part 61 is 40. For 141, it's 35. And then two, you're trying to accomplish all of your aeronautical experience requirements. So there's certain things you have to demonstrate and check off, before you can take your check ride. Either way, you're probably going to have way more than the minimum, than the 40 or 35 by the time you actually accomplish all of that. I think the national average at the time of your check ride is more like 75 hours. So if you're like really grooving, you might be able to do it in the minimum, but you're probably going to have more than the minimum. So what do flight lessons actually look like? Well, they're usually broken up into 3 different segments. You'll have a briefing. You're going to talk about what you're about to go do and try to accomplish. You're going to go do the actual flight. And the cool part about this is that you'll always be in the left seat, you'll always be in the pilot seat. You don't have to like watch from the back seat or something while your instructor does it. Like, no, you're put into the pilot seat. You're doing the real thing from flight number 1, which is really cool. And then after the flight, you'll have a debrief and you just talk about it. what went well, what do you need to work on, what is the next flight going to look like. So that's the structure, and you're going to do it over and over and over. And then you're going to be working through basically a whole list of things you have to check off. So you're going to start with maneuvers. You're basically just going to learn climbs, descents, and turns, because every other maneuver that you're going to do in flying, like landing or taking off or all kinds of stuff, like it's really just a combination of climbs, descents, turns, power control, that sort of thing. So you're going to learn the maneuvers, do slow flight, learn stalls. Then you're going to learn how to take off and land. And there's different types of takeoffs and landings that you'll try to get good at. You'll work on emergencies, and so you'll do simulated engine outs and things. And you're just kind of slowly building up your experience level. Ultimately, building up to the first big milestone is going to be your first solo flight. So up to this point, you're doing everything with an instructor in the other seat. But you get to the solo flight, this is where you're going to do it on your own. But in order to solo, you need a few key things. First, you need your student pilot certificate, which is really just a piece of plastic. It's a license from the FAA, but it doesn't allow you to do anything. The next thing you're going to need is another logbook endorsement. And so if you think about like the student pilot certificate, it's kind of like the car, but the logbook endorsement telling you what you're allowed to go do is actually the keys to the car. And so you're going to get an endorsement that tells you, okay, you were certified to solo at this airport, and you'll probably have some weather restrictions. So wind needs to be within these parameters or this crosswind component or whatever. They're going to put some boundaries on it. They're not just saying, okay, cool, go do whatever. They're going to give you a logbook endorsement for something specific. And then the other thing you'll need really, really importantly is your medical certificate. So you have to go through a dedicated medical exam to get this. And this is with an AME or an aviation medical examiner. It's a separate doctor than your normal doctor. There's probably lots in your area. You can just Google AMEs near me, or you can contact the FSDO near you, which is the Flight Standards District Office, and ask them for a list of AMEs. They'll give you a list, and you'll go do an exam with them. There's different levels of a medical examination or certification that you can get. There's third, second, and first. First is the highest, third is the lowest. As a private pilot, you only need a third class. It's really for the higher stuff is when you're going to be paid to fly, basically. So you can do a third class medical, which is the bare minimum. It's not very stringent. There is an eye exam, like an eyesight test, but then a lot of it is going to be just reviewing your medical history, your current diagnoses, if you have any, your current medications that you are taking. And this is really, really important. You want to make sure if you're taking any medications or you have any conditions, you want to make sure that that's going to be compatible with the FAA before you get too far down this road. There are certain disqualifying conditions, some that will just disqualify you outright, but there are some that are kind of in between where you can get it, but you're gonna have to go through a process called getting a special issuance medical. And this is where you would work with your AME and the FAA to gather a lot of paperwork for your condition and basically get it all approved by the FAA. And so really you just want to try to get your ducks in a row before you just show up to get your medical exam. So if you have a condition or a medication that you're worried about, I would just go ahead and Google whatever that is with FAA on the end, and you're going to find some stuff that kind of discusses what the FAA, what their stance on that is. But more importantly, like the internet, it can be a bad place. Like you Google anything, it usually sounds really bad. Like they give you the worst news. But I would instead just go ahead and call an AME near you and ask them if they can give you a consult, or if you can talk to them, pay them for 30 minutes and just ask them like, hey, here's what I'm dealing with. Like, how's the FAA going to view that? What do I need to do to have my ducks in a row? And then one more thing about soloing, you have to be at least 16 years old to do it. Funny enough, my 16th birthday fell on a Sunday, and I got to solo on my 16th birthday, which is really cool. So my parents drove me to the airport. I soloed the airplane. Then the next day on Monday, they drove me to the DMV, and I got my driver's license. So I was flying by myself before I was driving by myself. Is just kind of funny the way it worked out. And that solo flight, you'll never forget it. It's not going to be anything new. Like your instructor is going to make sure like, hey, I have flown at this airport before. You know how to land the plane. You might even warm up with them that morning and do like a couple laps in the traffic pattern there and land. And they'll say, cool, just pull over here and let me out, and go do the same thing. It's not like, you're not doing anything you haven't done before. You're going to do stuff you're comfortable with and just be able to check off like, okay, I flew by myself. And I'll never forget when I flew the first time. I took off and I just remember like looking behind me and just staring in that back seat like, oh man, I'm really alone. And it's so cool. And you'll never forget. It's such a rewarding feeling because from that point on, like you're always a pilot. You have piloted a plane by yourself. And that's something that no one can ever take away from you. It's just so special. And then once you've soloed, the remainder of your training is going to be kind of a mix between solo flight and then still working with an instructor. So, then you'll work with an instructor on cross-country navigation and go into places outside the vicinity of the airport Once you get comfortable with that, you'll actually do that solo. You do your solo cross country. And again, this is when the FAA recommends after that flight, you go take your written exam. Not a requirement, but just a suggestion. And then you'll have a few more requirements like some night flying, some simulated instrument flying, and some other things to kind of knock off the list before you are ready for your check ride. So at the end of your training, you'll get another logbook endorsement of your instructor saying that you are ready for your check ride. It's actually called the practical. Most people just refer to it as the check ride. So you go into your check ride with your written exam in hand and all of your requirements met and your logbook endorsement. And now it's your final test. And so your check ride is actually made up of two different tests that they usually happen on the same day. It's your oral and then the flight test or the practical. Again, most people just call it the check ride. And so you have to be 17 years old to take your check ride. I took mine a little bit after my 17th birthday. And so the first part you're probably going to do is the oral. And as long as the weather is good, you'll do that and then go straight into the flight. But the oral can be kind of intimidating. Unfortunately, you don't get to do it with your instructor that you've been working with, that you're comfortable with. This is going to be with either an inspector or an examiner from the FAA or what's called a DPE or a designated pilot examiner. They're not employed by the FAA, but they've been given the authority on behalf of the FAA to give you this examination. And so you've never met them, like you're sweating bullets, you're ready, like an instructor has told you that you're ready, but it's still really nerve-wracking. And so the oral usually lasts at least like a couple of hours, can last more. Again, if you only got a 70 on your written exam, they're gonna have to tack on a lot more questions. But the cool thing is you already know all the things they're going to cover in what's called the ACS or Airman Certification Standards. And it's this long document, explaining all the things that you need to know and need to be able to demonstrate in order to pass this test. And so it's not going to be just like rapid fire, like what's this and what's that? Like it's not like that, at least in all the check rides I've ever taken. Usually it's scenario based. So they'll tell you, hey, but before you get there, go ahead and plan across country. I want you to bring the weight and balance calculations, plan this out like it's a real flight, because we'll actually go fly some of it. But they're gonna use that to then talk through scenarios. So they'll say, cool, we're departing this airport. Hey, but you notice the weather's kind of coming down. What airspace are we flying into again right now? And what are the VFR weather minimums for this? If you notice the clouds are kind of coming down. It's like, okay, so it's like real world stuff, right? And then you start flying, and then they'll ask you more questions, and then they'll present different scenarios like, hey, we need to divert. Do we have enough fuel to get there? What are your fuel requirements? Like all that kind of stuff. And so it's gonna be kind of situational, real world. They might throw you some curveballs in there, but generally speaking, it's going to be fairly real world. Then you move out of the oral into the flight portion. And so this is going to be outlined in the ACS again. So there's not really going to be any surprises other than maybe some like simulated emergency scenarios that you don't know when those are coming. But everything else, like all the stuff you have to be able to demonstrate, it's in the ACS. You've probably already practiced it in a mock check ride with one of your instructors. So you're going to go demonstrate maneuvers. You're going to go demonstrate stalls. You're going to demonstrate different kinds of takeoffs and different kinds of landings. They're going to throw some sort of simulated emergency at you, like a simulated engine out or a simulated engine fire or something like that. And they'll tell you that perfection isn't the standard. Like they know you're nervous. They know you have nerves. But if you're like consistently off the mark and you're consistently not proficient, then they're going to have to bust you for that and fail you on the check ride. And so you can choose to do two things. Like if you do fail, you can either stop the check ride right then because maybe nerves have gotten the best of you and you just need to stop, or you can choose to keep going and like check off the rest of the things that they need to see. And then you can basically go back and then retake the check ride for just that portion. You got to go work with an instructor to brush up on the part that you missed, but then you can come back and take just that tiny little portion of the check ride again. So it's not like if you fail it once, you failed it forever. You can take it again. And the national pass rate for private pilot check rides is around 74%, depending on the time period. But remember, by the time your instructor endorses your logbook and says you're ready, and you've probably gone through mock check rides with them anyways, like you are prepared. So your chances of passing are really good. And once you've passed all of that, you will get a new card in the mail that supersedes your student pilot's license. And now you have your private pilot certificate. And any of the like limitations they gave you for your solo endorsements, like, wind maximums, and you can only go to these airports and stuff, like all that is no more. Like you're a pilot, you are the pilot in command, you can decide what you want to go do. Now, in terms of time and cost, the general estimate here is 6 to 12 months, $10,000 to $15,000. There's going to be exceptions on either end of that. I know someone right now is like, but I did it in 3 months for 8. It's like, I know. But that is a general range. And then really what's going to determine how expensive this is for you is three things. How often you can fly, the more the better, the cheaper. Where you're located, is it urban or rural rates? And then thirdly, what kind of equipment are you flying? Some airplanes are more expensive than others to rent. So you can just talk to your flight instructor or your flight school, and depending on those three things and some other factors, they're gonna help really dial in what the actual quote will be for you, but that's a good starting point. And then after training, really it's up to you what you wanna do. There's a lot of additional ratings and licenses that you can pursue. You can get your instrument rating, get your commercial, you can become a flight instructor. There's lots of different things you can do, or you can do a ton of things just as a private pilot. You can then go rent planes. You could join a flying club, which is kind of a hybrid rental situation. You go buy a plane. It's really just going to depend. One just warning I want to give you is a lot of people will finally get through their training and they'll go, oh, okay, I can relax, I can take a breath. And then before you know it, life gets in the way, and I'm going to fly in a few weeks turns into I haven't flown in 2 years and I am way out of currency. And then a lot of time goes by and people regret it. So don't let that happen to you. Just have an idea in mind of what you're wanting to do after you're private to continue your flying. And I know this is a lot to take in, but I promise you it is doable. If I could just like grab you and be like, it is possible. Like if you were hoping like, man, that'd be so cool to accomplish. I just want to be the one to tell you, like, you can do it. And if you need individual help, I have a link down in the description. If you want to hire me for an hour, ask all the questions you want, like I'd be glad to meet with you. You can also grab that free PDF that I mentioned at airplaneacademy.com/takeaways. It's also down in the description. Hope it can be helpful to you. And as a next step, I did put together a whole video that just shares my brutally honest advice. If you want to become a pilot, here is my advice to you. And that video is on the screen right now. I'll see you there.